With the recent state of the game and the PTS dropping and the delay to the raid, there's a lot of stuff to talk about, especially when it comes to PvP in the Dark Zone. Now, I of course made that pretty negative video on the PvP. It is the way that I feel about the game right now. But I think that a lot of the changes that they brought up during State of the Game and a lot of the changes that we can see in on the PTS, they're going to make the game more interesting and they're definitely worth talking about. We're looking at talent changes, higher gear score on gear, new recalibration, damage modifiers for PvP, etc, etc, etc. So today I just wanted to talk about everything and basically give my thoughts on them. So yeah, we'll start off with the nerfs and the buffs to a lot of the weapons and the gear talents. As some of you may have already seen, the top performing talents such as Berserk, Strained, Frenzy, Safeguard, Clutch, Unhinged, Patience, or Critical, they all got hit with the nerf hammer. And while I can see that some of these nerfs were pretty fair, for example with Unhinged or Surgical, I don't think that the nerfs were too bad. There are also some nerfs here that I think they way overdid, usually by giving it a double nerf and then way overdoing both sides of the coin. Now, it was also said that, you know, while they're doing these nerfs, the NPCs will have their health reduced in order to compensate for it, but still. Let's take a look at Safeguard, for example. It used to give you a 150% bonus to healing and repairing for 20 seconds. And now on the PTS, it gives you a 50% bonus to healing and repairing for 5 seconds. So the healing amount got cut in 3 times, and then the duration is only a quarter of what it used to be. All while still having that 20-second internal cooldown after the duration expires. Now this, I think, is too much. I'd say, you know, either reduce the healing or the duration with the amount that you did here, and that would still be sort of fine. It still wouldn't be a great talent anymore, but it would still be sort of okay. But doing both at the same time is just going to make it so that no one will run this talent now, especially not if you're also buffing Reformation on the gun, which then gives you the same amount of healing bonus, 50%, for 20 seconds after getting a headshot kill. So that's a little bit odd. The same goes for Berserk and Strained. Usually people ran these two talents in combination with each other because they both required the player to be on low health. But they both got hit pretty hard. Berserk got its damage boost cut in half, only giving 10% of damage per 20% armor depleted and 5% damage per 20% armor in normalized. And Strained had its values flipped. It used to give 10% of critical hit per 5% armor, but now it gives you 5% critical hit per 10% armor missing. So the max bonus got reduced from 200% to 50%. Again, it's only 1/4 of its previous potential. And you would actually think that that's enough of a nerf, and I'd say that that probably is, but then Berserk also requires the player to run with 11 damage stats now, which means that you now cannot combine Berserk and Strained with each other anymore on a build, because Strained requires 5 or less damage stats, and, well, Berserk requires more than 11 now. So yeah, I think that these changes alone are going to severely mess up some builds that people have right now, including most of my builds. And I don't think a lot of people are too happy with that. But, of course, we have to ask the question, was this necessary? Well, maybe. I think it was obvious that these talents were the outliers right from the get-go. I mean, when did I make that video on Berserk and Strained? It was like on launch day or something? Not even that. It was 1 day before the game officially came out because I already played it through early access. Right from the get-go, you could just see that these talents were so much stronger than the average talent in this game. So yeah, on one side I can definitely see why these talents needed to be tuned down a bit. On the other side though, I think that they overdid it with these changes, and I believe that the meta will just shift away from these talents to some other talents that fell just short of taking the spotlight previously, such as, for example, Unstoppable Force. I think the meta is already leaning very heavily towards going for more base damage and then just doing away with crit. And I think that these changes to these talents is just going to completely... it's going to be that final drip that makes the bucket spill for players to just abandon crit builds and SMG builds altogether. I think that's really going to be the case. And also, I do have to ask the question, if these talents needed to be nerfed so heavily because they are so powerful that they disrupt the game's difficulty curve to the point where they have to be adjusted or else the content is too easy, then I just have to ask, how was this not found before the game launched when these talents were created and tested? Because, again, players have been running these talents since launch. Like right when the game came out, it was super obvious that these talents were the best in the game. So if that wasn't intentional, then what happened during the testing phase? Did you not test these talents or figure out that these were the strongest? I don't really know. I think you could have prevented pissing off a lot of people if these talents weren't so strong to begin with. Because now people farmed for their builds and you're going to make them farm for other stuff now, which is, I don't know. It feels like a kick in the nuts to some people. I don't really care because, I'm used to it. I'm a YouTuber for this game, so what can I say? If I have to grind 20 hours for a build to show it off, then I'll do that. But a lot of people aren't really happy with that. But yeah, let's move on, because some talents are also going to get buffed. Like I said, Reformation, Spike, Spotter, mostly skill-based talents. I don't think that with these buffs, these talents and skills will be very strong, because I don't think the skills themselves are very strong. They're very weak, so I don't think that these talents will see a lot of play. And also, I've tested Reformation. Reformation is still bugged right now, even on the PTS. It flat out doesn't work, so hey, please fix it as well. Now, another change coming to the game with the next update is that gear in the Dark Zone will start dropping above 500 gear score all the way up to 515 in order to promote more players to farm in the Dark Zone. And I am kind of mixed on this, in all honesty. I get that they want to promote players to go to the Dark Zone more often, as the Dark Zones are kind of empty right now. But I don't think that this is the solution. I think you've already presented the solution yourself, and that is that the brackets are coming together, which is another thing that they're doing, by the way. For those that don't know, previously players of different world tiers played in different brackets. So if you were a world tier 2 player, you couldn't find players that were playing in world tier 5, and vice versa. But since we have normalization, that doesn't really matter anyway. So now what they're doing, they're bringing all those brackets together. So once you reach level 30, you play with everybody that's also level 30. And I think that this change alone is going to be enough to make the Dark Zones more populated. If it isn't, then you should be taking a look at why players don't want to play in the Dark Zone, instead of putting the best loot as a carrot on a stick behind the Dark Zone. Because what that's going to do is going to force players that don't want to play DZ into the DZ just to get gear that they can then use in the rest of the game. And I think that, the Division 1 made this mistake of making some of the best gear at launch only available in the Dark Zone. And I don't really think that they should do that again, because PvE players aren't going to like that, and PvP players are also not going to like that, because it's going to fill up the Dark Zone with players that don't want to play PvP, that don't want to fight, and, once they get killed once, they just leave the server because they don't want to play PvP. They're forced into the Dark Zone just to get some loot that they otherwise cannot get. So I don't think you're making anybody happy with this, except for the few people who actually play the Dark Zone to gank unsuspecting farmers and then run away with their loot, which is, I guess that is actually the intention of the Dark Zone. That's the story behind it, I guess, but I just think the majority of the player base is not into that type of gameplay. So trying to force that is just not a good idea. The Dark Zone is, I think for most players, just a place where everybody can just test their builds out and mess around and fight each other. I don't think anybody actually goes to the DZ to consistently farm. There might be some people, but it's definitely not its main purpose. And 515 gear score, it might make it so players actually go to the Dark Zone, but you won't make a lot of players happy with it. So you're gonna get results, but you're gonna get mixed results, I think. And also, I don't think it's too bad though, because 515 gear score compared to 500 gear score is peanuts. We're talking single-digit percentage-based increases. It's really nothing to lose sleep over if you don't want to go into the Dark Zone. But that's not the point, is it? It's just the principle of putting that loot behind the Dark Zone experience, so to speak. What I think is going to have a far bigger impact on the gearing game, though, is that the Recalibration Station is changed now. On the PTS, there's currently no cap on the recalibration, or, well, there is a cap, but it's very, very high. What that means is that when you transfer one stat over from one gear piece to another, no matter how high that stat roll is rolled, it will remain almost identical when you transfer it over. And this is a pretty big change, because it means that you can have one gear piece which has very low armor but an insane amount of weapon damage on it, and another gear piece with a very high armor roll Well, you just recalibrate the armor, roll over, and now you have an insane chest piece, so to speak. That's just an example I just came up with. And this is huge for true min-max players because it means a couple things for the recalibration station. First up, you're never allowed to recalibrate talents because then you're wasting a slot on potentially getting an insane amount of extra stats on a gear piece. And also it means that you're now going to have to farm for items with a high base armor. Because items with a high base armor have lower stat rolls. So you want to get an item with high base armor and then get another item with high stat rolls and then transfer the high stat rolls over to the item with high base armor. That's basically the only way you want to recalibrate now. So yeah, what do I think about this recalibration station change? Well, I think a lot of players are initially going to be fairly happy with it because they're like, yeah, I can get more stats now, and it's like, it's not confusing anymore as to why I can't roll X amount of weapon damage to another gear piece, you know, more freedom, more freedom, more freedom. But I think at the end of the day, this is not really a good thing because it really limits what you can do with the recalibration station. Again, as I said, you pretty much never want to recalibrate talents. You never want gear pieces that have a low native armor, whereas right now, you could trade off some low native armor for having more cooldown reduction on the holster, for example. It's like, it's a give and take instead of just take it all. And also with the current system, there's still a problem when it comes to the normalization with it, because on the PTS, what the normalization does is boost all your gear up to 500 gear score level. But it doesn't take into account the boost that you got through the recalibration. So if you, for example, replaced one fairly low stat roll with a super high stat roll that you got from another gear piece, well, it would still end up having a super low stat roll as soon as you go normalized PvP, because it ignores the fact that you recalibrated a higher stat from one gear piece to the other. And the issue that this brings is that you still need two different versions of the same build, one for normalized and one for not normalized, because you'll need one which has that high armor, low stat roll version, which you can then recalibrate for not normalized, and then also one with low armor and high stat roll version for the normalized. And this is all very confusing. I bet you're not even following, but just look at this. I got two identical holsters. One holster is clearly better than the other because I recalibrated 24% cooldown reduction on it. But as soon as I go into the normalization, it doesn't take into account that I recalibrated a higher stat roll, so it falls back down to 17%. But then I also have another holster which isn't boosted through the recalibration. For example, this one, which is only 20% cooldown reduction. But then if I bring this into the normalized DZ, it's going to remain 20%. So one holster is better for not normalized, and the other one is better for normalized. The reason is because one is affected by recalibration and the other one isn't, and that's going to make things even more confusing. It's just not a great system. So what I think they need to do with this, well, first up, I wouldn't let this recalibration change go through, because I'm just not a big fan of it. It really limits what you can do with the recalibration if you're trying to min-max a build, and it's going to make it so much harder on the RNG to grind specific items if you want to complete a good build. But if it does go through, I think that the stats on the recalibration station should bypass the normalization, because then that allows true min-maxers to still get that small edge over anybody that's just picking up all right gear and then let the normalization do its thing. And then also you wouldn't need two different builds if that were to be the case. That's basically my thoughts on the recalibration station now, if for anybody that's managed to keep up, I guess. Another good thing about the normalization now, though, is that skill power isn't affected by it anymore, which means that skill mods now work in the Dark Zone and in Conflict. I've still got that +4 ammo mod on my cam launcher, and that does seem to work just fine in the Dark Zone now. I'm still unsure, though, if boosting your skill power through recalibration on the PTS would mean that skill power is lowered again when you go in the normalized areas, just like it is with the cooldown reduction. It's something that I wanted to test, but I didn't have enough materials on the PTS to recalibrate enough items and really get into it. And yeah, I'm not going to farm that much on the PTS to really figure that out. It's not my job. I'm sure someone else can figure that one out. And then to finish it up, we have some more PvP specific changes that I kind of wanted to mention as well. Nothing too big, but worth mentioning. First up, the rogue timer and the manhunt mechanic is coming to the occupied DZ. Very good thing. Then second up, they're removing the rogue cooldown from the normalized DZ. Also a very good thing. Good job listening to the feedback. And then they're also increasing the PvP damage modifier from 70% to 40% in the normalized DZ. And honestly, I thought that this change was going to be big, very, very big, because changing a damage modifier just like that, that's going to increase the time to kill drastically. But it seems that at least as of now, the new PvP modifier hasn't been implemented yet because, well, the time to kill is still pretty much identical. As you can see here, these are the same build. I'm shooting at the same guy who also has the same build, and the time to kill is pretty much the same. Yes, I do more damage, but I think that's more because the normalization now boosts my weapons to World Tier 5. And the guy can also tank more damage, but I think that's also because of the new normalization. So I don't think the PvP modifier is in yet. Although from 70 to 40%, it does sound like a lot. It definitely sounds like a lot. And if it works in the same way as I expect it to work, then I think we should be really careful with this change, because we're just an inch away from going back to running in circles with how powerful the cam launcher is. So as soon as this change has been implemented, then I'll test it, I guess. But for now, this isn't something that I've been able to look into yet. And then also, you cannot crit while hip firing anymore. Sure. I don't really care about this. I don't think hip fire was very good. But if it was too good, then I'm fine with this being gone. And then also, it's been announced that the raid has been delayed, which I think is a good move when making so many changes, because it's gonna take some time for people to readjust, reform their builds, and then make good builds again in preparation for the raid. If they were to drop it right on the 25th while everybody's build is pretty much fucked up, then that would be a very bad thing. So yeah, overall thoughts on all of this. Well, I feel the changes are very good, but I don't think this changes how I feel about the PvP in general. Sure, the Occupied's going to have rogue timers, and the rogue cooldown in the normalized DZ will be gone. And, maybe there's going to be a little bit more build diversity, just a little bit more, because we're all going to fall right back to more weapon damage, I can tell you that right now. But the game still doesn't change fundamentally for me. I'm not expecting it to with the update. I'm not going to say this update is bad because it didn't do that. No, this update's it's really good, but it still doesn't change the way how I feel about the PvP. For example, with the deflector drone, instead of having that be something that you press before a fight and then it eats up a certain amount of bullets before it goes away again, have the deflector drone be an ability that you could use mid-fight that deflects all incoming bullets for 1 second. It would still be the same skill, same type of skill, it's a drone that deflects bullets, but with my version, it would take a lot more skill to know when to activate it, and would allow you to use it mid-fight instead of just pre-activating it and then running in to tank some bullets. Or, maybe the Firefly, instead of holding it in your hands, aiming it, and then throwing it at the enemies, why not have it shoot out of your shoulder thing or whatever when you press it instantly? And then when you press it again, it detonates and then blinds enemies in the area. Just a really fast snap, chew, boom, gone. That's how skill should be. Maybe that's just my imagination, though. I really wished we had stuff like that in the game, but we're not gonna have stuff like that in the game. But I'm not gonna let that be the main thing of this video. I think the changes that are coming are very good, but I still feel sort of the same way about PvP even after hearing this. Anyway, that's it for this video. So as always, I'll see you all later. Or, like they say in the Netherlands, zie je later.